Well, let's speak now with Paul Musgrave, who joins us here in the studio. He's an associate professor of government at Georgetown University in Qatar. Paul, thanks so much for being with us today. Look, we just heard from our correspondent in Tehran, Tawhid Asadi. He talked about how Iranians are used to this zigzagging kinds of statements that they hear from Donald Trump. I want to ask you specifically about that. Look, here in the region, we all went to sleep last night wondering if America was going to escalate tensions with Iran, if Donald Trump was going to follow through on these threats to strike very hard at Iranian targets. We woke up this morning, we found out Donald Trump is saying he's holding off on this, in part because he says that Iran asked him to. What does all this do when it comes to this conflict? We've been down this road before, where Donald Trump has threatened escalation and then pulled back at the last second. Does that harm American credibility? Does that embolden Iran? What does that do in the overall picture?
I think overall, one of the important things to realize is that credibility is a precious resource. You can give your word and maybe break it once or twice, but if people believe that your word is meaningless, if people believe that what you say is not what you're going to do or what you agree to is not what you're going to carry out, then it makes international politics, diplomacy, settling major issues almost impossible. One of the things that the Iranians have been saying in their media statements and elsewhere is that it is difficult for them to know if a deal that is struck with the United States is actually going to be held to. And you might say this is wartime propaganda or psychological warfare on the Iranian point of view. But if you look at the record of the last 12 years, I think it's actually just a blunt assessment of the facts that Tehran's relationships with Washington, its negotiations, its deals have been very difficult, from the JCPOA, which was broken under the first Trump administration, down to the present day. So when we have this cycle of President Trump constantly threatening escalation and then backing down, something he's done at least 5 times in the last few months, it really means that it's hard for any of us to take this seriously. And it's also hard for anybody to trust that if President Trump says that a deal has been struck, then that's actually going to stick. And I think that this is something that is weakening U.S. credibility. It's not only making promises of future cooperation harder to realize, it's even making the attempt to coerce Tehran more difficult, because it means that every time President Trump says something, the pressure on him to actually demonstrate that his word means something gets even greater, and that could lead in the future to a much bloodier outcome than anybody would want.
Paul, President Trump also said in his post on Truth Social that Middle Eastern countries, other Middle Eastern countries other than Iran, had also asked him to hold off on these strikes right now. I want to ask you about that. Where do things stand when it comes to the relationship between the U.S. and other countries in the Gulf? We saw just a few moments ago that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia spoke with Donald Trump, that he urged de-escalation. We know that lots of countries in the Gulf are urging de-escalation because they're concerned about how Iran might retaliate and might target their infrastructure in the event of an escalation from the U.S. Where does that relationship with Gulf countries in the U.S. stand right now? And what must these Gulf countries be saying to Donald Trump and members of his administration at such a crucial time?
Structurally, militarily, politically, even institutionally, the countries of the GCC, Jordan, other countries in the region are linked to the United States in a very fundamental sense. Much of their military kit is U.S.-based. Much of their intelligence, their training is derived from U.S. models. That means that you can't just walk away from those relationships. On the other hand, you have the President of the United States who is acting, posting, threatening, not just Iran, but also from time to time GCC countries themselves. You remember a couple of weeks ago when President Trump said that the United States was going to become the guardians of the strait and that it was actually going to essentially start taxing GCC countries. He walked away from that, just as he walked away from an effort to begin escorting tankers and our other ships through the strait, because it was clear to GCC countries that this would be disastrous from them. So you have a very tense, I think, set of political relationships at the top, in part because of President Trump's recklessness, I think, is really the only way that you can describe it. Everybody is trying to cope with the fact that they are stuck in an equilibrium in a situation that doesn't admit of any easy answers. But that also means that Gulf countries, Gulf leaders, the peoples who live here, have to deal with the fact that on one level, their security continues to be guaranteed by the United States. But on the other hand, in the short term, it's the United States itself whose actions have brought us to a situation in which we're going to bed every night, waking up in the middle of the night like I did last night, checking to see if we're going to be bombarded.
All right. Paul Musgrave, Associate Professor of Government at Georgetown University in Qatar. Thanks so much for joining us on set. Always great to get your perspective.